Have you ever wondered what a saint who could read souls saw when he looked into the hearts of married couples? What did he witness when husbands and wives stood before him, carrying fears so heavy they believed God himself would understand? And what happened when those same couples tried to justify closing their marriage to the very gift God designed it to carry? In San Giovanni Rotondo, Italy, between 1918 and 1968, a Capuchin friar with bleeding wounds on his hands heard approximately 5 million confessions. His name was Padre Pio of Pietrelcina. He was born Francesco Forgione on May 25, 1887, in a small farming village in southern Italy. The stigmata appeared permanently on his body in September 1918. For 50 years, those wounds bled, every single day, without infection, without healing. Medical doctors examined them repeatedly and found no natural explanation. He would list sins penitents had forgotten to confess. He would refuse absolution to those pretending repentance. He could tell when someone was lying before they opened their mouth. Father Pasquale Cataneo, a visiting priest, spent his entire bus ride to San Giovanni Rotondo in July 1988 preparing his confession. He examined his conscience thoroughly, made promises of amendment. But as the town came into view, one thought crossed his mind that he never spoke aloud. The spiritual life at times seems like trying to climb glass. When Father Pasquale entered the confessional, confessed his sins, and received absolution, he turned to leave. Padre Pio smiled at him with an amused look and said quietly, "So, the spiritual life seems like climbing glass, eh?" Father Pasquale stood there unable to speak. Padre Pio had heard the thought he never voiced. Not because of genuine poverty, but because of fear. Fear of economic hardship, fear of losing comfort, fear of what people would think, fear dressed up as prudence, and Padre Pio refused them absolution. And just so you know, this script is researched and factual using sources from Father Stefano Manelli's biography, Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, published by the Franciscans of the Immaculate, along with Gennaro Prezioso's The Life of Padre Pio, which draws from Padre Pio's own diary and sworn testimony of those who lived with him and knew him best. These are not generic hagiographies. These are primary source documents compiled for his beatification process. Now back to the information. This was not sentimental language. It was doctrinal precision, and Padre Pio forcefully refused to accept anyone who, of set purpose, refused the begetting of children. He refused them absolution. Father Stefano Manelli recorded on page 117 of his biography that Padre Pio believed children are a gift of the Lord, quoting Psalm 126, verse 3. But more than that, Padre Pio saw marriage as having a divine plan established by God at the wedding itself. Not a suggestion, a decision, already made, already determined. The number of children was settled at the altar, and to reject that number was to reject God's authority over the marriage itself. Families and sins against life. These were listed alongside cursing, blasphemy, lying, calumny, and immodest dress, all in the same category, all treated with equal seriousness. Padre Pio didn't want to deviate from traditional Catholic doctrine at all. Prezioso noted on page 180, real justifications and real consequences. That's an average of 273 people per day. The average confession lasted only 3 minutes. 3 minutes to see a soul, identify the sin, demand genuine contrition, and grant or refuse absolution. Padre Pio confessed women in a traditional confessional booth. Men knelt beside him in the old sacristy. It was like being before the judgment of God, witnesses said. And in those 3-minute windows, Padre Pio encountered pattern after pattern. Couples using artificial contraception, couples deliberately avoiding pregnancy through methods condemned by the Church, couples who had decided 2 children were enough, or 3, or none at all. And when they came to confess, Padre Pio asked one question: "Are you truly sorry? Do you intend to stop?" Many said yes, some meant it. But Padre Pio could see the ones who didn't, and for those, absolution was refused. "Yes, then why do you refuse his gifts out of fear?" she tried to explain. The economy, the uncertainty, the practical concerns. Padre Pio stopped her. "Fear is not from God," he said. "If the fear drives you away from God's plan, it is from the enemy." He refused her absolution and told her to return when she was ready to trust God completely. She left in tears. She told Padre Pio she and her husband had prayed. They had examined their consciences. They realized their fear was rooted in pride and control. They wanted to manage their lives without surrendering to God's providence. They were ready to stop using contraception. They were ready to accept whatever children God sent. Padre Pio gave her absolution immediately. 2 years later, she gave birth to twins. Her husband's work situation improved unexpectedly. They went on to have 6 children total. She wrote years later that refusing absolution was the greatest mercy Padre Pio ever showed her, because it forced her to confront the lie she had been living. The lie that she trusted God, but only within limits, she said herself. They told Padre Pio they couldn't have children and were devastated. Padre Pio looked at them and said, "That's not what I see." The husband was confused. "What do you mean, Father?" Padre Pio said, "I see a choice, not a medical problem." A choice. The wife broke down. She admitted they had been using contraception from the beginning of their marriage because they wanted to establish their careers first. They wanted financial security. They wanted to travel. They wanted freedom. But now 5 years had passed, and they suddenly wanted children, but were pretending to Padre Pio it was infertility. Padre Pio told them, "You cannot lie to me, and you cannot lie to God. Go home, pray. Decide if you want children or if you want control, and come back." They came back 2 months later. They confessed the full truth. They stopped using contraception. Within a year, they had their first child. Within 10 years, they had 7. And not necessarily fatal, so you are using her health as an excuse, the man tried to argue. Padre Pio said, "If you truly fear for your wife's life, practice periodic abstinence. The Church permits this for serious reasons, but you want pleasure without responsibility. That is not love. That is using your wife's body for your own satisfaction while rejecting the purpose God designed into the marital act." The man left angry. He never returned to Padre Pio's confessional. Witnesses said he went to another priest who gave him absolution without question. Years later, his marriage ended in divorce. Couples who came seeking absolution but not conversion, who wanted God's mercy without God's authority, who wanted the comfort of the sacrament without the demands of the gospel. He spent 5 decades in the confessional, hearing the sins of Italian Catholics living through 2 world wars, economic collapse, fascism, the sexual revolution, and the release of the birth control pill in 1960. And during that entire period, the Catholic Church's teaching on contraception never changed. Pope Pius XI issued Casti Connubii in 1930, condemning artificial contraception as intrinsically evil. Pope Paul VI issued Humanae Vitae on July 25, 1968, reaffirming that teaching. Padre Pio died on September 23, 1968, just 2 months after Humanae Vitae was published. Padre Pio wrote, "I know that your heart is suffering much these days in the interest of the Church, for the peace of the world, for the innumerable necessities of the people of the world, but above all, for the lack of obedience of some, even Catholics, to the high teaching that you, assisted by the Holy Spirit and in the name of God, are giving us. I offer you my prayers and daily sufferings as a small but sincere contribution on the part of the least of your sons, in order that God may give you comfort with his grace to follow the straight and painful way in the defense of eternal truth, which never changes with the passing of the years. Also, in the name of my spiritual children and the prayer groups, I thank you for your clear and decisive words that you especially pronounced in the last encyclical Humanae Vitae, and I reaffirm my faith, my unconditional obedience to your illuminated directions. The defense of life, the defense of marriage, the defense of God's authority over the transmission of life itself." Mocking. During Mass one day, he suddenly began weeping uncontrollably. Later, he told his fiancée he had seen 3 interwoven crowns of thorns on Padre Pio's head, piercing his skull, blood streaming down his face. The woman hadn't seen anything. She asked Padre Pio in confession if this was true. Padre Pio confirmed it. He bore the crown of thorns at Mass for the expiation of sinful thoughts. The young man converted immediately. The couple married and followed Padre Pio's 5-step ladder for sanctification: daily communion, weekly confession, meditation, examination of conscience, spiritual reading. One time, Padre Pio said to an Irish friend named Donal Enright, "The day in which people, frightened by the economic boom, from physical damages or from economic sacrifices, will lose the horror of abortion, it will be the most terrible day for humanity. Abortion is not only homicide, but also suicide. This was recorded in sworn testimony and preserved by the pro-life shrine of the Immaculate Conception." Padre Pio continued, "You would understand this suicide of the human race if, with the eye of reason, you could see the earth populated by old men and depopulated by children, burnt as a desert." He saw deserts where families should have been, and he saw this decades before demographic collapse became obvious in Italy, Japan, South Korea, and across Europe. He saw couples who claimed they trusted God, but only trusted him within boundaries they controlled. And most of all, he saw souls choosing comfort over obedience, choosing security over surrender, choosing their own wisdom over God's plan. And in testimony after testimony, those couples said the same thing. The refusal was mercy. It forced them to stop lying. It forced them to face their real reasons. It forced them to choose between 2 gods, the God of control or the God of providence. Padre Pio repeated at the end of Mass, "Be happy, be happy, be happy." Within months, they discovered Paula was infertile. They were devastated. Padre Pio promised to pray the chaplet of the Sacred Heart of Jesus every day for them. He told Giovanni, "You'll see, you'll have as many children as the choirs of angels." That meant 9. On July 24th, 1951, their first daughter was born. The baby fell gravely ill shortly after birth. Doctors gave no hope. Padre Pio told them the child would live a long and healthy life. She recovered completely. Giovanni and Paola went on to have 9 children exactly as Padre Pio prophesied. Paola said 60 years later, "After 60 years of marriage, I can say that Padre Pio's recipe, the chaplet of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, works. Giovanni and I love each other as much as on the first day." This story was documented in Giovanni's book Il mio amico Padre Pio, published in Italy and reported in Alatea on January 18, 2021. They had 21, 13 survived to adulthood. One of those children founded the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate, a congregation approved by the Holy See on June 23, 1990. Another son, Pio Manelli, had 7 children. 2 became priests, 5 became nuns. The Manelli family has been declared venerable by the Church, and their cause for beatification is in process. This was documented by the Archdiocese of Malta on May 24, 2012, and confirmed by multiple sources, including a social media post by EWTN Vatican on their verified account. Not because large families are inherently holier, but because obedience produces fruit, because trust in God's providence unlocks grace, because saying yes to life, even when it's terrifying, creates space for God to work miracles. Some went to other priests, some left the church entirely, some continued using contraception and receiving communion elsewhere without confessing it. Padre Pio knew this. He said once, "If you go to confess to another priest to gain absolution, you will go to hell together with him." He wasn't being dramatic. He was seeing souls, seeing the state of grace or the lack of it, seeing the trajectory. Because Padre Pio wasn't inventing new rules. He was applying what the Church has always taught, that the marital act has 2 inseparable meanings, unitive and procreative. Pope Paul VI wrote in Humanae Vitae, paragraph 12, "This teaching is founded upon the inseparable connection, willed by God and unable to be broken by man on his own initiative, between the 2 meanings of the conjugal act, the unitive meaning and the procreative." Meaning, to deliberately separate those meanings through artificial contraception is to violate the nature of the act itself. It's to use your spouse's body while rejecting the purpose God built into that body. It's to say, "I want union, but not fruit. I want pleasure, but not responsibility. I want love, but not life." He saw couples who claimed to love each other, but were using each other. He saw marriages that looked stable, but were built on mutual selfishness rather than mutual gift. He saw fear dressed up as prudence and pride dressed up as planning. Because that's what faith is, not believing God exists, but trusting Him enough to obey even when it's terrifying. And here is the answer. Padre Pio bore the wounds of Christ in his body for 50 years. He bled every single day. He suffered physical pain that doctors said should have been unbearable. He experienced spiritual attacks from demons that left him covered in bruises. He spent 15 to 19 hours a day hearing confessions in a confessional that witnesses described as stifling hot in summer and freezing cold in winter. He ate almost nothing. He slept 2 to 3 hours a night. He carried the sins of millions of people on his soul. Do not tell Padre Pio he didn't understand suffering. Do not tell him he didn't understand sacrifice. A vocation of total self-gift, not conditional self-gift, not self-gift within comfortable limits. Total self-gift. And children are the fruit of that gift. The living icon of 2 people saying yes to each other and yes to God and yes to whatever God sends. But actually provides. The testimonies bear this out. Couple after couple who stopped using contraception and trusted God reported that somehow things worked out. The money came, the health improved, the fear subsided, not because life became easy, but because grace became sufficient. Because when you align your life with God's plan, you tap into a power greater than your own resources. Sometimes trusting God means genuine hardship. Sometimes it means poverty. Sometimes it means exhaustion. Sometimes it means suffering that feels unbearable. And Padre Pio would say, yes, that's the cost of discipleship. That's what it means to pick up your cross daily. That's what it means to die to self so that Christ can live in you. Because Christianity is not a self-help religion. It's not about your best life now. It's about conforming your life to the pattern of Christ crucified. And Christ died in poverty, in humiliation, in physical agony. And He asks us to follow. But serious reasons like genuine poverty, serious health complications, or other circumstances that make another pregnancy truly dangerous or impossible. But the key word is serious, and Padre Pio had a gift for seeing when reasons were serious and when they were excuses. Not long after, the young woman became pregnant and was extremely worried she would lose the child. They made the trip to San Giovanni Rotondo. When Padre Pio arrived, he stopped near the husband, looked at him kindly, and gently patting his shoulder with a wide smile, said in an ironic and somewhat amused tone, "So it was all just a dream, eh?" The couple was confused. What dream? They hadn't told Padre Pio about any dream. But the husband had been having recurring dreams that they would have a child, dreams he dismissed as wishful thinking. Padre Pio saw the dreams, confirmed them, and the child was born healthy. This testimony was given by Anna Baroni from Chiavari, Italy, on August 12, 1994, and recorded in the archives of little-known stories of Saint Padre Pio by mystics of the Church. He spoke what others were afraid to say. He demanded what modern culture calls unreasonable, and he refused to compromise, even when it made him unpopular, even when it made him seem harsh, even when it cost him friendships and reputation. That it's better to suffer temporary pain in the confessional than eternal pain in hell. That the most loving thing you can do for someone living in sin is refuse to pretend everything is fine. Because the refusal forced them to choose, forced them to stop playing games with God, forced them to face the truth about their own hearts. 0.88. By 2000 it was 1.24. By 2023 it was 1.24 again. Italy now has one of the oldest populations in the world. Schools are closing for lack of children. Towns are empty. The birth rate is so low the population is projected to drop from 60 million to 28 million by 2100. The desert Padre Pio prophesied. Populated by old men, depopulated by children, burnt. Empty, dying. But let's be specific about what happened in those confessionals, because the pattern repeated itself with documentary precision. Between 1940 and 1968, thousands of Italian couples came to Padre Pio confessing the use of artificial contraception. The methods varied. Some used barrier methods, some used withdrawal. After 1960, some used the newly available birth control pill. But the justification was almost always the same. Economic fear. We can't afford another child. Times are uncertain. We need to save money. We need security first. Children later, maybe. It was middle-class anxiety. It was the fear of losing status, the fear of not being able to provide luxuries, the fear of not keeping up with neighbors. One couple admitted they were avoiding children because they wanted to buy a car first. Another couple said they were waiting until they could afford a bigger apartment. A third couple said they needed to finish renovations on their house. Padre Pio would listen to these justifications and then ask one question. Do you have food today? Do you have shelter? Do you have clothes? Yes. Then you have what you need. Everything else is greed dressed up as prudence. That he had never had to support a family. Padre Pio heard this and responded quietly to another priest. I understand suffering better than he knows, but his suffering is chosen. He chooses fear over faith. I cannot absolve what he will not repent. The man never returned, but witnesses said his marriage fell apart within 5 years. His wife left him. His children grew up resenting him. The comfortable life he was trying to protect by limiting his family never materialized. Instead, he ended up alone. Padre Pio listened to their entire explanation. Then he said something unexpected. He told them their reasoning was understandable. Their fear was natural, but natural fear is not the same as supernatural faith. He asked them, if I told you that God has already prepared the resources for your 5th child, would you believe me? They hesitated. He said, go home, pray for 1 month. Ask God to show you whether your fear is reasonable or whether it is testing your faith. Come back in 1 month. They came back 30 days later. During that month, the husband's employer had promoted him unexpectedly. The raise was exactly enough to cover the cost of another child. They stopped using contraception. Their 5th child was born in 1957. That child grew up to become a missionary priest serving in Africa. He brought thousands to the faith, all because his parents chose to trust Padre Pio's challenge, all because they let their fear be tested by prayer. Not always immediately, but shift. The fear to catastrophe wouldn't come. The resources would appear. The grace would multiply. He would spend hours in prayer for the souls he had just refused. He would offer his own physical pain as intercession for their conversion. Father Pellegrino, one of his fellow friars, once asked him why he was so severe with people. Padre Pio responded, I act like that so that I don't let myself be overcome with emotion. Seeing people suffer is enough to bring me to tears, and then I would no longer be able to continue my ministry. This was recorded by Gennaro Preziuso on page 152. The absolution would be granted, and years later they would testify that the refusal saved their marriage, saved their family, saved their souls. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Theologians dissented. Priests refused to preach it. Couples ignored it. According to a study published in The Conversation on June 24, 2025, by the 20th Century, Christians in some of the most heavily Catholic countries in the world, such as France and Brazil, were among the most prodigious users of artificial contraception, leading to dramatic decline in family size. When an 1886 penitential manual instructed confessors to ask parishioners explicitly whether they practiced contraception and to refuse absolution unless they stopped, the order was virtually ignored. And the response from the clergy was devastating. According to Robert McClory in his book Turning Point, which chronicles the history of the Birth Control Commission, many priests simply stopped asking about contraception in confession. They decided the teaching was too difficult, too unrealistic, too out of touch with modern marriage, and so they gave absolution without requiring couples to stop using artificial birth control. Padre Pio refused to do this. In his letter to Pope Paul VI, written in August 1968, just weeks before his death, he specifically thanked the Pope for his clear and decisive words in Humanae Vitae. While thousands of priests were abandoning the teaching, Padre Pio was doubling down. While theologians were claiming the teaching would change, Padre Pio was calling it eternal truth, which never changes. With the passing of the years, he knew what was at stake. He saw the trajectory, and he spent his final weeks on earth defending the teaching that most of the Catholic world wanted to forget. We're interested in documented truth, and this script is built on primary sources, not speculation. Padre Pio had predicted exactly this. He told his Irish friend, Donal Enright, "The day in which people, frightened by the economic boom, from physical damages or from economic sacrifices, will lose the horror of the abortion, it will be the most terrible day for humanity." That day came 10 years after his death, and it came because the generation that could have listened to him in the confessional chose not to. Some families stayed faithful, and those families produced saints. The Manelli family produced a founder of a religious order. The Siena family produced 9 children who all maintained their faith. Other families, whose names we don't know, produced priests, nuns, missionaries, and faithful laypeople who are still serving the church today. These families are the remnant, the ones who trusted when trust seemed impossible. The ones who said yes to life when everyone else was saying no. He was 81 years old. The stigmata on his hands disappeared within hours of his death. Witnesses said his hands looked like those of a newborn child, smooth, unmarked, as if the wounds had never existed. He was beatified by Pope John Paul II on May 2, 1999. He was canonized on June 16, 2002. His feast day is September 23rd. And his message about marriage and children remains unchanged. Matrimony is for children. When you married, God made the decision. Trust him. Surrender control. Open your marriage to life, even when you're afraid, especially when you're afraid. And this is what modern couples need to hear, not because the church is cruel, but because souls are at stake, because civilization is at stake, because the choice to close your marriage to life is not a private decision. It echoes through generations. It shapes nations. It determines whether your grandchildren will live in a culture of life or a culture of death. He saw it with the same supernatural vision that let him read hearts and see stigmata and prophesy futures. And he spent 50 years in the confessional trying to save souls, one absolution or one refusal at a time. Some listened, their families flourished, their children became priests and nuns and parents themselves. Their faith multiplied across generations. Others didn't listen. They chose fear over trust. They chose control over surrender. And their line ended. Their names were forgotten. Their refusal to trust God produced exactly what they feared: emptiness, loneliness, sterility. The letter to Pope Paul VI, preserved by EWTN. The testimony of Giovanni Siena, published in his book. The cause for beatification of Settimio and Licia Manelli. The population data from Italy's National Statistics Institute. None of this is folklore. None of this is legend. This is documented history. This is what happened when a saint who could see souls looked at married couples and told them the truth. When you married, God made the decision. Trust him.